Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone.
You know that moment when you've just shared something really painful with someone you love? A loss, a fear, a quiet heartbreak you've been carrying for weeks. And they look at you with soft eyes and say, "Oh, sweetie, at least you still have your health." And something inside you just closes. Not because they're a bad person, not because they don't care, but because in that single sentence, something that felt enormous to you got folded up, patted on the head, and handed back smaller than it was. You walked into that conversation hoping to finally be seen. And somehow, you walked out feeling more alone than when you started. That's not a small thing. That's one of the loneliest feelings a human being can carry. And if you've ever felt it, if you've been on that side of the conversation, the side where comfort somehow made things worse, I want you to know there's nothing wrong with you for feeling that way. There's a name for what happened, and understanding it might just change every important relationship you have left. We spend so much of our lives trying to do right by the people we love. We show up. We bring casseroles. We say, "I'm so sorry, and let me know if you need anything." We mean every word of it, and yet ache. Sometimes the people we love most feel like we've handed them an umbrella and pointed at the rain instead of standing in it with them. This is the quiet difference between sympathy and empathy. And it's not just a vocabulary lesson. It's the difference between a connection that heals and one that, without meaning to, isolates. Sympathy looks at your pain from the outside. It sees suffering and responds with feeling bad for someone. It's standing on solid ground and looking down into the well where someone has fallen. You're concerned. You're kind. You might even throw down a rope. But you're still up there, and they're still down there. There's a distance in it, even when it's offered with the most tender heart in the room. Empathy is something entirely different. Empathy climbs down into the well. It doesn't rush to fix or reframe or silver line. It just sits in the dark with another person and says, "I know this dark. You're not alone in it." And here's what I want you to sit with for a moment, because this is where it gets deeply personal for so many of us women of a certain season of life we were raised. Most of us to be the comforters. The ones who hold the space, the ones who make it better. We learned early that the right response to pain was to soothe it, redirect it, wrap it in something softer. We were taught, often without a single word being spoken, that sitting with discomfort, just sitting with it, was somehow a failure. That if someone was hurting near us and we didn't do something, we had fallen short. And so we became very, very good at sympathy. We became women who could walk into any room of grief and know exactly what to say to lift the heaviness, even just a little. And there is beauty in that. Don't let anyone take that from you. But here's the unspoken truth that so many of us are only now discovering in these deeper, quieter years, that same instinct, the one that taught us to soothe, sometimes kept us from truly connecting. Because when we rush to make pain smaller, we're often doing it as much for ourselves as for the person in front of us. Sitting with someone else's suffering, really sitting with it, requires us to touch something in ourselves. And that can feel like standing at the edge of a very old wound. This is where empathy asks something harder of us than sympathy ever did. It doesn't ask us to fix. It asks us to feel, not perform feeling. Actually feel. To lower our defenses, enter someone else's experience, and say with our whole presence, "What matters to you, matters to me." That's where the real sanctuary lies. In that space between two people where no one is trying to make the pain go away. Just make sure the person in pain doesn't have to carry it alone. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with it before you answer. Think back to the last time someone you care about was in real pain. Not a bad day, but real pain. The kind that doesn't have an easy answer. And ask yourself honestly, what was your very first instinct? Was it to pull them close and just be still with them in it? Or was it to start searching almost automatically for the thing you could say that would make it better? If it was the second one, I don't want you to judge yourself for that. Not even a little. Because that impulse, that reflexive reach for the rescue rope, didn't come from nowhere. It was built into you. Carefully, quietly, over decades. And understanding where it came from might be the most compassionate thing you do for yourself today. Here's what most of us were never told. Sympathy is, at its core, a distance management tool. That sounds clinical. Stay with me, because it's actually one of the most humanizing things I know. When someone we love is hurting, their pain activates something in us. Neuroscientists call it the mirror neuron response. That involuntary flicker of feeling that happens when we witness suffering in someone close to us. We don't just observe their pain. We echo it somewhere deep in our nervous system. We feel a version of it ourselves. And that's uncomfortable. Sometimes it's more than uncomfortable. Sometimes it touches something we've spent years learning not to touch. So the mind, being the ingenious protector that it is, finds a way to stay close while keeping a thin layer of glass between us and the full weight of what the other person is feeling. We express care. We offer comfort. We say the words. But we do it from just far enough away that their grief doesn't fully merge with our own unresolved places. That's sympathy. And it's not weakness. It's self-protection. It's the nervous system doing what nervous systems do, trying to keep us safe. Now here's where it gets personal. Because for women, especially women who grew up in households where emotions were managed rather than honored, this pattern runs even deeper. Many of us learned before we had words for it that other people's pain was something to be solved. That love expressed itself through action, through fixing, through making sure everyone in the room was okay before you let yourself feel anything at all. Some of us had mothers who cried in private, fathers who went quiet instead of falling apart. We watched the adults around us carry enormous weight with a kind of stoic grace that we mistook for strength. And we learned to do the same. We learned that sitting with uncertainty, with pain that doesn't resolve, with grief that doesn't have a timeline, was somehow self-indulgent. We learned to move through it, not into it. And then we spent 30, 40, 50 years being very competent at managing everyone else's emotional weather, while our own inner landscape quietly went uncharted. Does any of that land somewhere familiar? There's a concept in psychology called emotional containment, and it has two very different meanings depending on who's using it and how. In the healthy version, emotional containment means you can hold a feeling inside yourself without being destroyed by it. You can sit with sadness, anger, fear, and not be swept away. That's a gift. That's resilience. But there's another version, the one so many of us were handed, where containment means suppression, where holding it together means never letting it out, where being strong means being unreadable. And when that becomes our normal, when that's the water we've been swimming in for most of our lives, then sitting quietly in someone else's pain, without deflecting it, without fixing it, without finding the silver lining, feels genuinely threatening. Not because we don't love them enough, because we love them and ourselves in the only language we were taught. And this is the quiet grief that no one really talks about in the context of empathy. The cost of always being the one who holds it together is that you sometimes forget how to let yourself be held. So many women I've spoken with, women who have spent their whole lives being the strong one, the reliable one, the one everyone else leans on, describe the same strange loneliness. Not a lack of relationships. They have plenty of those. But a loneliness that lives inside the relationships. A feeling of being deeply involved in everyone else's interior world while somehow remaining a stranger to their own. And the reason sympathy can feel so natural, so safe, is that it lets you stay in your familiar role. The helper, the healer, the one with the warm voice and the steady hands. Empathy asked you to step out of that role entirely. Empathy asked you to say, I don't have an answer. I won't pretend I do. But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. And whatever you're feeling right now, you don't have to feel it alone. And here's the thing about that kind of presence. It requires you to know your own interior well enough to navigate someone else's. It requires you to have made some kind of peace. Not perfect peace, but working peace. With the darker rooms inside yourself. The grief you never fully grieved. The fear you packed away in a box labeled, deal with later. The losses that reshaped you quietly without ceremony. Because empathy isn't just about listening better. It's about having done enough of your own inner work that you don't panic when someone hands you their darkness. That's not a small ask. And I don't want to pretend it is. But here's what I've come to believe, having thought about this for a long time, having lived some version of this story myself, the women who learn to offer real empathy, the deep, rooted, I'm climbing down into the with you kind, aren't the ones who have it all figured out. They're the ones who have gotten honest about what they carry, who have stopped performing okayness, who have learned that their own pain, named and respected, becomes the very bridge that carries them into someone else's. Your wounds, tended with honesty, don't disqualify you from deep connection. They're the doorway to it. So here we are. We understand what sympathy is. We understand why we default to it. We've traced it back through the decades, back through the households we grew up in, back through the quiet lessons we absorbed about how strong women handle hard things. And maybe, just maybe, something in the last few minutes has shifted. A small recognition. A gentle loosening of something that's been held tight for a long time. But understanding something in your mind and living it in your body are two entirely different countries. And I don't want to leave you with a beautiful insight that evaporates the moment someone you love calls you crying at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. So let's talk about what this actually looks like. Not in theory, in real life, in the messy, imperfect, sometimes heartbreakingly tender moments that make up a human relationship. The first thing I want to tell you is this empathy is not a performance. This is where so many well-meaning people get tangled up. They hear about empathy, they want to do it right, and they start treating it like a script. They Google the empathetic responses. They memorize phrases. They practice the tone of voice. And then they sit across from someone they love, and they say all the right things in exactly the right order. And somehow, it still doesn't land, because the person on the other side of that conversation isn't feeling heard. They're feeling managed. There's a difference, and people can feel it in their bones, between someone who is with them and someone who is working on them. Between someone whose eyes are actually soft and someone whose eyes are calculating the next correct response. Real empathy doesn't start with the right words. It starts with the decision to actually arrive, to put down the mental clipboard, to stop preparing your response while they're still talking, to let what they're saying actually reach you, even if it's uncomfortable, especially if it's uncomfortable. That's the practice, not the words, the arrival. Now, arriving sounds simple. It is not always simple, because sometimes the person in front of you is carrying a pain that rhymes with something you haven't finished carrying yourself. A daughter going through a divorce and you remember yours. A friend facing a diagnosis and you think of the one that changed your own life. A grandchild struggling with something you struggled with in silence for years. In those moments, the pull towards sympathy is almost gravitational. Because if you really go in, if you really let their experience touch yours, you might end up somewhere you weren't prepared to go. So here's what I want to offer you, and please hear this gently, that's okay. You don't have to be a fully healed, completely unburdened woman to offer empathy. You don't have to have resolved every old grief before you're allowed to sit with someone else's. What you do need, and this is the honest truth, is just enough self-awareness to know the difference between their feeling and yours. When you can feel the echo in yourself and say quietly, this is touching something in me, and then gently set your own story to the side, not forever. Just for now, just for this conversation, you stay present for them without disappearing into yourself. That's not a technique you learn in an afternoon. It's a practice you return to over and over for the rest of your life. But every single time you do it, it gets a little more natural, a little less effortful, a little more like breathing. Let me give you something concrete, because I think sometimes we need to hear what this actually sounds like. Not the textbook version, but the real human, slightly imperfect version. Imagine your sister calls you. She's been struggling in her marriage for years, and tonight something broke open. She's crying. She's saying she feels invisible, that she's been trying so hard for so long, and she just doesn't know if she has anything left. The sympathetic response, the one most of us would reach for first, out of love, out of habit, sounds something like this. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. But listen, you two have been through hard things before. He loves you, I know he does. Have you tried counseling? Maybe a weekend away, just the two of you? You're so strong. You've always gotten through things." Every word of that comes from love, every word. And every word of it, without meaning to, tells her, your pain is a problem to be solved. And here are some solutions. And by the way, you shouldn't feel quite as bad as you feel, because here are the reasons it'll be okay. Now feel the difference in this. I hear you. That sounds exhausting, not just tonight, but the weight of all the nights before tonight. Feeling invisible to someone who's supposed to really see you. That's one of the loneliest things there is. I'm not going anywhere. Tell me more. No solutions, no silver lining, no gentle redirect toward hope. Just, I hear the size of this. I'm not going to make it smaller. I'm staying. Can you feel the difference in your chest? That slight release, even just reading it. That's what being truly witnessed does to a human being. It doesn't solve the problem, but it makes the problem survivable. It makes the person carrying it feel less like they're carrying it alone. There's another piece of this that I think doesn't get talked about enough, especially for women in this season of life. Empathy isn't just something you give. It's something you're allowed to receive. And for so many of us, the strong ones, the capable ones, the ones who have spent a lifetime being someone else's sanctuary, the receiving is actually the harder practice. How many times have you brushed off a concern someone raised about you? How many times has someone asked, "How are you really doing?" and you've smiled and pivoted back to them? How many times have you said, "Oh, I'm fine," when you were anything but, because asking for that kind of deep witnessing felt somehow too much? Too needy. Too unlike who you've always been to everyone around you. Here's the truth that lives in the unspoken spaces of so many women's lives. You cannot sustainably give what you never allow yourself to receive. You can try. Lord knows so many of us have tried, for years, for decades, to pour from a vessel that no one was ever allowed to refill. And what happens eventually is not a dramatic collapse. It's a quiet withdrawal, a gradual dimming, a slow retreat from the very intimacy you were pouring yourself out to create. Opening yourself to empathy, letting someone actually climb down into your well for once, is not weakness. It is, in fact, one of the most courageous things a woman who has always been strong can do. It says, I trust you with the real me, not the capable me, not the together me. The actual me, the one who is sometimes scared and sometimes lost and sometimes just needs someone to sit in the dark with her for a while. That kind of vulnerability, offered to the right person at the right time, doesn't diminish you. It deepens every connection you have ever wanted. And here's the last thing I want to leave in this part of our conversation before we move into what all of this means for the life you're living right now. Empathy isn't about being endlessly available to absorb everyone else's pain. It isn't martyrdom with better vocabulary. It requires boundaries, real ones, tended ones. Because you cannot be a genuine presence for someone else if you're running on empty and calling it love. The most empathetic people I have ever known are not the ones who gave everything to everyone and left nothing for themselves. They are the ones who knew themselves well enough to know what they had to give, gave it fully, and protected the quiet space inside themselves where their own truth lived. They had a sanctuary, an interior one, that no one else's storm could reach. And from that still place, they could walk into anyone's hardest moment and simply powerfully be there. That sanctuary is available to you. It always has been. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us it exists. There's something that happens to a woman in this season of life that nobody really prepares you for. The noise starts to quiet down. The decades of carpools and career pivots and managing everyone else's calendars and crises. They begin to settle. And in that settling, in those longer stretches of stillness, something starts asking to be heard. Something that has been waiting with extraordinary patience for you to finally have a moment. Yourself. Not the version of you that shows up reliably for everyone else. Not the you that knows exactly what to bring to a funeral and exactly what to say at a graduation. The deeper you. The one with the unfinished sentences and the old aches and the quiet whispers that surface at 3 a.m. when the house is still and there's nothing left to manage. And here's what I've come to believe with my whole heart this season. Right now, wherever you are in it, is not too late for anything that matters. It is, in fact, precisely the right time, because you finally have something you didn't have at 30 or 40 or even 50. You have enough perspective to know what's real, and enough accumulated love in all its complicated, imperfect forms to know what's worth fighting for. What's worth fighting for is connection. True connection. The kind that only empathy makes possible. Let's talk about the relationships in your life right now. The ones that are still here. Because I think sometimes we forget in the weight we carry from the ones that didn't make it. The friendships that drifted, the family members we lost, the versions of relationships that we outgrew or that outgrew us. We forget to really look at what's still standing. Your daughter who calls every Sunday, even when the conversation stays surface level. Do you know what she's not saying? Your oldest friend, the one you've known since before either of you became who you are now. When's the last time you let the conversation go somewhere neither of you planned? Your partner, if you have one, and even the word partner holds such different meanings depending on what your particular story has been. The person who has watched you change across decades. When did you last let them see the part of you that hasn't finished changing yet? And what about your children? Grown now, maybe carrying their own weight in ways that echo yours more than either of you would like to admit. What would it mean to stop being their soft landing long enough to let them see that you sometimes need one too? These are not rhetorical questions. They're invitations. Because here's what I know about empathy in long relationships. And this is one of the unspoken truths that I wish someone had handed me years ago. Intimacy doesn't just deepen automatically with time. Time without presence actually does the opposite. It creates a very specific kind of distance that's especially hard to name because it develops so slowly you barely notice it happening. You can spend 30 years with someone and still be strangers to each other's interior life. Still performing the roles you assigned each other in year 3, long after both of you have grown into someone entirely different. Still having the same conversations on the surface, because going deeper feels, after all this time, somehow more vulnerable than it did at the beginning. And that's the quiet grief of long relationships that nobody talks about enough. Not the dramatic estrangements, not the obvious breaks, but the slow, gentle drift away from each other's realness. The way two people can love each other faithfully, consistently, and still spend years just slightly out of reach. Empathy is what calls you back. I want to talk about your relationship with your own story for a moment. Because everything we've discussed, the sympathy reflex, the self-protection, the learned strength that sometimes kept you from going deep, all of it lives inside a narrative. A story you've been telling yourself, probably for most of your adult life, about who you are and how you handle things. And some of that story is true. Beautifully, powerfully true. You have been strong. You have shown up. You have carried things that would have broken other people. And you carried them with a kind of grace that the people around you may never have fully named, but absolutely felt. But some of that story, and I say this with such tenderness, has kept you from yourself. The part of the story that says, I don't fall apart. The part that says other people need more than I do. The part that says this is just who I am, about patterns that were never really chosen, just inherited, just absorbed, just worn so long they started to feel like skin. Empathy, real empathy, turned inward, is the willingness to look at your own story with the same gentle, non-judgmental presence you're learning to offer others. To say to yourself, of course you learned to manage instead of feel. Look at what you were handed. Look at what was modeled. Look at how young you were when you decided that being needed was safer than being known. That's not self-pity. That's self-understanding. And there is a world of difference between the two. Self-pity keeps you in the story as a victim of it. Self-understanding lets you step slightly outside it. Enough to see it clearly. Enough to decide which parts you want to carry forward and which parts you're finally, gently, ready to set down. You know what the most radical act of empathy looks like at this